EDF Renewables' purpose is to build a net zero energy future with electricity and innovative solutions and services to help save the planet and drive well being and economic development. We're committed to providing future generations with the means to power their lives in the most economic, environmental, and socially responsible ways possible. We understand the importance of managing energy integration in a way that also enables clean energy projects to improve the electric grid. Our tailor made solutions can solve energy challenges facing our customers, no matter the size or complexity. EDF Renewables, energy your way.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Renewable Energy Smart Pod. I'm Sean McMahon, and today we're going to be talking about batteries and the grid. Energy storage and transmission are always hot topics, but with the American Clean Power Association's brand new Recharge Conference going on right now in Portland, Oregon, I figured it was a good time to shine a spotlight on those topics. To do just that, today, I'm welcoming back to the show Rob Gramlich, the founder and president of Grid Strategies. Rob was on this show back in 2021, and there are few people who know more about the grid than Rob. So I wanted to bring him back to talk about not only how the grid continues to evolve, but how innovation in the battery sector is making an impact on grid optimization. This is one of two episodes we're doing this week about batteries and the grid. In case you missed it, be sure to check out my conversation with Chris Taylor, the CEO of GridStore. GridStore is a developer and independent power producer that specializes in standalone energy storage. So Chris shared his insights on how batteries are helping utilities and businesses optimize their energy usage while reaching their clean power goals. And since GridStore was just founded in 2022, Chris also shares some great stories about the things he knew he'd encounter when building a startup and a few surprises that have popped up along the way. So give that episode a listen when you can. But for now, let's get things rolling with Rob Gramlich from Grid Strategies. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. I'd like to welcome back to the show Rob Gramlich, the founder and president of Grid Strategies. Rob, how you doing today?
Good, Sean. Great to be with you.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you back. It's been a few years, so I figured it was time we reconnect. When it comes to the U.S. grid, there's few people who have more expertise than you. So let's start things off right here. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges the U.S. grid is facing right now?
Sure. Well, you're kind to say that, but we're observing, like a lot of people are, a number of factors. Number one, power demand growth is up significantly. And at the same time, we sort of run out of the spare capacity on the bulk power transmission system from, through the 80s and 90s. We built up a pretty robust grid, but then it hasn't expanded a lot. And now we're just trying to connect so many things on the supply side and the demand side to this constrained grid that we keep seeing all kinds of indicators of congestion and constraints, like the 2.6 terawatts of generation that's stuck in the interconnection queues, as well as just hindrance of the movement of power from one region to the next, which is very helpful for reliability reasons if you can move the power, but the grid constraints prevent that. So we have all of that. There have been some policy developments we should talk about, both legislative and at FERC, and we can get into that.
For sure. I do want to get into the queues and the policy stuff, but with regard to some of these challenges, what kind of impact is that having on the build out of more renewables here in the U.S.?
Yeah. So, grid congestion is definitely slowing down renewables, probably a little bit more for wind than solar and batteries, but it affects all of them just because, the underlying root cause of the slow interconnection is limited grid capacity. And the grid operator has to do this very complicated analysis to figure out what network upgrades might be needed. Well, if we had a robust network, that wouldn't be so hard or take so long. So it really is a constraint. The electrical equipment and supply chains is also a constraint. All of these things on the load side, data centers and renewable generation need transformers and breakers and all that. And that's sort of related. And it's just tough for the project developers, right? They have to get through this very uncertain and long interconnection process. At the same time, they also have, increasingly difficult local siting issues that are also unpredictable as you enter an area where you want to develop. And then add to that the procurement challenge is also uncertain and long. So you got like three separate things, and you gotta get a trifecta. You gotta win in all three of those games to get a project built. So it's a challenging time.
Are there any of those three things that you think is either the biggest problem or the easiest to solve?
None are easy. I do think interconnection is solvable, and to some extent, that's going to rely on building out the transmission infrastructure, which also is solvable. And I think we've gotten some good recent policies from FERC that should help. But of course, it takes a while. But even there, a lot of transmission can be built in a 2-3 year time frame. The ones that get on the news take 18 years, and those definitely exist, and that's a problem. We need to fix that. But there's also some speedier transmission that can get done.
Okay, and then we're talking a little bit about batteries right now. What kind of role has the development of better technologies in battery? Is that kind of easing the pressure on some of these, transmission queues?
Well, batteries are definitely coming on and making great contributions, and their general reputation for helping out at a lot of points on the grid is definitely bearing out. They unfortunately have to go through the interconnection queue like everybody else, right? So a lot of the grid scale, the multi-megawatt scale connected to the transmission system have to connect and go through that process, just like wind and solar and gas and anything else. So, those are taking a little while, but there's also, I think, a lot of good opportunities in the transmission and the distribution system. Those might be utility owned, where they can solve some near-term problems. I do think you could connect a lot of renewable generation if you better integrate storage, and that storage is probably like storage as a transmission asset, really devoted to that purpose. But that needs to get integrated with the utility or the RTO transmission plans, and that's a whole effort, but we're working on that here at Grid Strategies and some integrated resource planning processes.
So then getting back to the policymakers, right? You mentioned FERC earlier, and I know some of the, some even states and regional levels are going in. So what are some of the highlights that have either been proposed or even been, implemented in the past year or two?
Well, the main one, I think, is Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC's recent Order 1920. That's on regional transmission planning and cost allocation. And the reason I think that's so important is that it requires long-term transmission planning for multiple purposes that sort of recognize the reality of the evolving resource mix. And so you look at retirements and you look at added generation in terms of quantities and location, and then you put together a transmission plan. And that proactive approach to do that, I think, will allow much speedier integration of new resources, including renewables. And, they're supposed to consider, different technologies, storage and grid enhancing technologies, advanced conductors, et cetera, in that process. So that's really great. Of course, a rule in the Federal Register doesn't by itself lead to projects. You have to implement that in the regions, and FERC has to go through the compliance and rehearing and all these other steps. But that's all, in progress. And I think FERC did the right thing to issue a meaningful rule. They could have easily compromised and gotten a little bit more consensus, but done something that was completely useless. But, one consequence of that is we have to work hard with a lot of state officials to try to persuade them why this is the right thing to do for their state. Everything these days gets put in a partisan frame. We need to undo that. So that's, some of the work going on. Anyway, so all of that, you asked about, what are major initiatives? That's the Order 1920. A few regions anyway are doing quite a bit on transmission. MISO did their long-range transmission plan, Tranche 1, the first sort of round of that. MISO and SPP seem to be moving forward on what's called JTIQ, which is it's like 50 plus gigawatts of new renewables that could be connected that kind of impact the MISO PJM border. So that's some good joint RTO work. And California ISO has some notable improvements with their regional transmission plans. They're doing kind of 20-year out planning and looking outside the state to, get in some Idaho wind and New Mexico wind and solar to complement, and then some offshore wind. So all of those, getting the diverse resource mix really helps to be able to integrate more and to contribute to resource adequacy, to get a good, diverse, reliable overall supply. So those are some notable highlights. There's a few utilities out there that are doing some good things on grid enhancing technologies. National Grid's got a couple, and Velco in Vermont, and PPL in Pennsylvania. It kind of seems somewhat random which utilities decide to do that, but that's a longer story.
I gotcha. And then also recently, the Biden White House, in collaboration with, I think it was 21 states, announced a program to boost the adoption of grid enhancing technologies. What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, it's very exciting. Great to have White House support for advanced transmission technologies. Not a normal thing, not anything actually we've really seen before. That is really great. I had the opportunity to attend and speak at one of the two recent White House meetings on that, where they gathered utilities and lots of others. They have 21 states kind of signed up to work on it. That could be helpful. Of course, most transmission is really in federal jurisdiction. So states have certain things they can do, but that'll be the next step, is sort of like figure out how they can help and participate and do the work. And of course, it's the utilities are the ones who own the lines, and this has to work for the utilities. They and only they get to say what technology gets put on their line. But there are a lot of utilities that are, interested in doing some things on these technologies, and they have some lessons to share with other utilities. And that's, I think, part of this effort is to spread those practices.
Yeah, anytime that people are sharing knowledge and information, it's generally a good thing. And bringing it back to FERC, is there anything they can do to boost grid enhancing technologies?
Sure. So they did include, some role for grid enhancing technologies and high performance conductors in Order 1920 for planning, but that's not really the best sort of way for them to get deployed. A 20 plus year plan that's done every 5 years, when some of these gets can just be done in 2 months, and the benefits can exceed the costs in a 6-month payback or something less. So I think there is more that FERC can and should do. One thing is line ratings. Generally a regulator has both carrots and sticks. They could do something that's a little bit more like a requirement on dynamic line ratings. And so I hear FERC might do something actually this month in June of 2024 to get going more on that. So that would be really exciting. And then, in more the carrot area, there's this little known section of the Federal Power Act, Section 219B3, you can look it up, which is like basically Congress saying in 2005, FERC, you should put incentives in place for this exact need, this operational technology. FERC has still never specifically implemented that. And I think there are some incentives. We developed a shared savings proposal. So I think FERC could finally do that. So a little bit of carrots, a little bit of sticks, but there is a lot that I think the regulator of transmission could do in that area.
I love it when you go deep into the policy there, citing, section this and that. That's incredible. Getting back to advancements in battery and energy storage, I've seen headlines recently where states like California, Texas, they've made investments in energy storage, and early returns are that perhaps it's paid off, avoiding blackouts, things like that. So what's your reaction to that? And then where do you see that going? Do you see other states kind of following suit? What do you see from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the use cases among many for storage is sort of peak load, like especially peak summer, hot afternoon and evening power. So PV through the daylight hours and charging the batteries during, while the sun's up, and then discharging the batteries in the evening when it's still hot. You're still using air conditioning, but you don't have the solar power. So you're essentially extending the solar power. And that's a important use case all through Texas, Southwest California, and they are getting very extreme heat waves, right? And Texas, I think, deployed 3 gigawatts of battery storage in the last year, and that's going to help them a lot, along with 6 gigawatts of solar PV and about 10 gigawatts total. So they've had that's about a 10% increase in their total capacity in the state, and that's almost aligned with the amount of load growth they have, because they have load growth from all the sources people are talking about. It's all happening in Texas. But I really think through this hot summer, we're going to see solar and storage really come through again, just like it has the last few years in California, right? A few years ago, California was kind of short on capacity. I think they got behind on resource adequacy, and they've been catching up mainly through batteries and PV. And the combination has really been helping them get through these summer heat waves. In California, it kind of goes all the way through like September, because when they run out of hydro coming from the Northwest, they still have some dicey situations in September, but solar and storage have really been helping a lot. So again, that's just one use case. There's a bunch of use cases for batteries, but that's obviously a very important one.
We'll be right back.
EDF Renewables is a market-leading independent power producer and service provider with over 35 years of expertise in developing onshore and offshore wind, solar, storage, and electric vehicle charging systems. EDF Renewables, energy your way.
Okay, and then I touched on it earlier about, will advancements in battery kind of ease the strain on the grid or ease the pressure to get all this transmission built out? Because, I hear about how much transmission we need to add and what needs to be upgraded, and it just seems like almost an unbelievable task that needs to be performed. And so I'm wondering if, even at the residential level, stepping away from utility scale for a second, but at the residential level, is there a way where batteries will be able to kind of relieve the pressure on the grid itself to a, I guess we'll say, measurable amount, right? I know in the big picture of things, me having a battery at my house doesn't matter, but do you think that the sum total will have an impact, or is it still going to be utility scale stuff through and through?
I look at all those sources as complementary ultimately. Like, let's think about it, 80% renewable and storage portfolio. You're going to have some geothermal, some hydro, some large-scale solar, some on-site local solar, some remote wind, and probably some very remote wind and some offshore wind. And all of those things are producing at different times, right? And that's why we need to move the power around, because to get to that level of penetration, you need all those things. And, if you just did one of them, then their value to the system would decline, right? Every resource, conventional and renewable, has declining marginal value once you get high penetration. So that's why you need all those things, and they're all part of the portfolio. So they don't really, in the long run, they're not really alternatives. In the short run, we are seeing in some integrated resource planning analyses where you do a really deep dive with a given utility, where, transmission could enable a lot of renewables, but there's sort of a debate, like where the utility might say, well, that's going to take too long, therefore I need to rate base this new gas plant. And if you look at that, we're seeing you could deploy batteries to get through, like to sort of resolve the contingency that you might otherwise be worried about, that enables the renewables to serve the need that's been identified in the process. So I think there are some short-term opportunities where the transmission just ain't going to happen in X years, but the storage could, and it could, get you through, at least through that period. And then, then you have the battery on the system, and you can do a lot of things with it longer term once you get it connected.
Okay. I'm glad to hear your perspective on that, because I've always been kind of curious. Just, it seems like transmission, like I said, is just almost impossible to get done for political, technology, all kinds of reasons.
Well, can I just respond to that? Because, it's easy to get that perception. But, it was only 10 years ago we built a ton of transmission and connected, half of the current wind industry. Like literally half of the current wind industry wouldn't exist had we not done that. And we did it. We had, my first project I worked on at the American Wind Energy Association in 2005. We went down and worked with folks in Texas on the competitive renewable energy zone transmission plan. And, they've had, a couple dozen gigawatts connected directly for that. And then we went to MISO on the multi-value projects, did the same thing there. I mean, this is the RTOs themselves do the planning and the utilities are involved. And, we were just one part of it. SPP did a lot. California did some. And now, New York is connecting some from upstate. So, you can build transmission. You just, that's where the FERC Order 1920 helps. You really got to do it proactively and long term because it takes a while. And you can permit it. It's never easy. It's harder for transmission than just about anything else, but it doesn't mean you can't do it.
So what do you think stands in the way right now? I mean, I don't mean to come at you with like a skeptical perspective, but yeah, I mean, lots changed in the last 10 years.
Again, we had a pretty simple formula 10 years ago, and we just stopped planning. Pretty much every region, maybe with the exception of California, stopped doing that long-term planning for 10 years. We took our eye off the ball, arguably without load growth and with low gas prices. And when you could do a bunch of solar without wind, then over the last 10 years, you could keep growing renewables without much transmission, and you could keep, meeting load. Now we're at a point where the solar needs transmission also, and we ran out of the headroom, and if we need a diverse supply, we need to connect new areas, and so it's just it's proactive planning for multiple purposes. In a holistic sort of multi-purpose framework, doing it scenario-based. There's these sort of simple transmission methods that now FERC said, well, that's not rocket science. Let's just make sure everybody does that. So that's Order 1920 right there.
And speaking of policy, I want to shift to a topic that's always very popular on this show, and that's the Inflation Reduction Act. Speaking specifically to, say, batteries and grid optimization, what's the biggest impact the IRA has had in those areas?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the storage tax credit that so many people worked on for so many years, obviously it got in there. It was a key part of it. So that's great to have a standalone storage tax credit. And of course, the long-term extension of the tax credits for wind, solar, and storage is really huge. So it's a big discount for any utility or energy buyer who wants clean energy or wants any kind of energy. Now the renewables are very cheap. So that helps a great deal, and it helps the business a lot, and it helps grid planners a lot too. Grid planners used to tell us in the wind industry that, well, how can I plan for you if your PTC is going to go away next year? And we didn't have a great answer for that. Now we do. These credits are there for the long term, at least until we reach carbon goals that are pretty aggressive. So that's going to help a lot. I think the industry has a lot more certainty. A lot of utilities are very much on board with this, and utilities and various businesses are already telling Congress, both sides of the aisle, hey, you got to keep this in place, whatever happens in November. I think that's basically going to happen. I think it's largely going to stay in place. There might be some items here or there that get clipped, but generally it's very strong, and it's really going to help drive clean energy.
Are there any aspects of the IRA that are perhaps underperforming that surprise you?
I will say on transmission, it didn't do a lot. And if you take IIJA, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and IRA together, they really didn't do much for transmission. And yet, it's my own view that if you had done only transmission and nothing else, you would get a massive amount of, you would get more carbon reduction than if you had done what it did. In other words, it's the grid that's the major constraint, and the laws didn't really address the grid. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. It's not like the administration wasn't trying, or different groups, advocacy groups weren't trying. It just kind of didn't get over the finish line. And so, we have to look to, there's always another day, right? So who knows? There will be some type of tax legislation next year in 2025, I'm pretty sure, under at least a few political scenarios. So we can hopefully go back and get that tax credit for transmission that got dropped out.
And that segues to my next question for you. And I think you might have already answered it, but I'm going to give you a chance here. If you could take a magic wand and just change one thing about the U.S. grid right now, what would it be?
Yeah, well, that would be a great Christmas present if we could just make transmission, cheaper to the ratepayers. The problem in the electric industry, I always describe the transmission problems as the 3 Ps: planning, permitting, paying. And the paying part is like, okay, if there's 40 or 50 significant utilities in the Western US and, over 100 in the Eastern, like which one is supposed to pay how much for a given line that might cross a dozen of them? There's so many beneficiaries across such a wide area. How are you supposed to allocate those costs? There's not there's not a clear, correct answer. The FERC policies are beneficiary pays, but it's just so hard to do. It's a public good, everybody benefits, so it's so hard to get people to voluntarily pay. So, FERC cost allocation policies are important, but if we could just take, 30% of the problem off the table with a 30% investment tax credit for transmission, it would just go a lot easier. That would be a lot better. So that would be a really good one that would help. Congress is working on permitting reform. That's also important. We might see a bill any day now, a draft bill from the Senate Energy Committee, and they've been talking a lot about interregional transmission, which is really important. And by the way, was not included in the FERC Order 1920, which was intra-regional. So, some type of permitting reform that speeds up all these processes and addresses interregional transmission in some way, that would be really helpful. Of course, that fits. The tax credit would help with that type of transmission as well. So these are all related, but I really think for the long term, maximizing clean energy, that would be the main thing. And keeping, of course, the tax credits in place from the IRA for solar storage, wind, and others.
I'm going to bring you back to energy storage and just ask you, do you have any bold predictions for the role energy storage will play in the renewables landscape in, say, 5 years?
I think it'll be very large and multi-purpose. The main use that we talked about a little before is kind of the time shifting on the hot summer afternoons, and that's a major resource adequacy benefit. And there's a lot of value, a lot of economic value that is there, and that the batteries will get paid for depending on the market structure. So that's really important. I do think there's a lot of more localized uses on the distribution system. Some more bolstering the resilience at the local level. Integrating EV batteries, by the way, the batteries that are sitting in my driveway right now, I'd love to have ways to bring them to bear. Getting into the kind of the virtual power plant area of work, and and then just energy and ancillary services markets, various RTO products. I think batteries will find some benefit there. A lot of the large buyers are looking for power, not just sort of national recs, but like trying to match the actual timing of their output. So storage, various types of storage will be certainly very valuable there. And if you talk to any system planner, they will say, look, we need longer duration storage. So I think the industry has, heard that message from system planners, and they're working on longer storage. Of course, if we make just the normal lithium ion batteries super cheap, even, if we keep making it more cheap, you just, stack 3-4 hour batteries, you get 12 hours. So they will, there will be value in the system. I'm quite confident at during the hours when the wind and solar are not producing, there will be higher wholesale market prices. And so any type of storage that can be there, charge up when the sun's shining and then discharge at those other times, there will be value in the market. I'm pretty confident.
Well, you just made the perfect market case for more energy storage, I guess. So I think we'll wrap things up there. So Rob, I really appreciate your time.
Great, Sean. Great to be with you.
Well, that's our show for today. But before we get out of here, I want to say one final thank you to the exclusive sponsor of today's episode, EDF Renewables.
If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and be sure to follow us on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter, where our handle is @RenewablesPod. And if you'd like a daily dose of renewable news delivered to your inbox, head to smartbrief.com and sign up for the Renewable Energy Smart Brief. The Renewable Energy Smart Pod is a production of Smart Brief, a future company.